Programme now arriving on Platform 3 is The Hard Sell, the show where the stick rattles back. Now boarding for the end of the show. Now boarding for the end of the show. Seriously, you guys. And today's episode is about trains. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and bust this out. Because there's really only one company involved here. British Rail. And before we get started, a fair warning to any Tory or Tory sympathising viewers I have, if any. I'd be surprised, but it's not impossible. This episode is not for you. I'm going to be going ahead and praising British Rail here, and bemoaning its privatisation, and indeed privatisation in general, as an inherently bad thing. You may not see things this way, and if so, you're more than welcome to make your own video documentary series about your own completely wrong and stupid ideas, called Lieutenant Dum-Dum's Carnival of Wrong or something. On with the show.
She took my baby away from me. Tears in my eyes I could not see. Oh, train, hurry, bring my baby back again.
British Rail was formed shortly after the war as part of Mr. Attlee's government's programme of rebuilding the nation by bringing the commanding heights of the economy under national ownership. The utilities, the raw materials and the public services, things necessary either for the economy or the public good, and therefore too important to be left to the unpredictable free market, which could kill it all too easily. This is what too big to fail is supposed to mean. So British Rail had the ability to, at least theoretically, run at a loss, which is just as well, because it did, almost always, especially in the early days when the rail network was much bigger and less efficient. Most of the country was connected by train one way or another at one stage, until the great modernisation of the National Railway under Dr. Richard Beeching. Modernisation in this case means mutilation, as Beeching decided the only way to run the system at anything close to a profit was to amputate a full third of it. Beeching has become one of post-war Britain's classic villains as a result, and not undeservedly. But he had a point. Some kind of drastic action was necessary, as the railway was hideously inefficient, with the undersubscribed smaller lines being basically black holes of cash. Some of them used so little they were costing 6 times as much to maintain as they were bringing in from their actual use. Of course, those ones, the ones that no bugger was using anyway, would by definition barely be missed. But Beeching's plan also destroyed plenty of lines that were being used on the regular, leaving a lot of people stranded. To this day, the feeling persists that
there should have been another way.
Thank you, Doctor. Surely the system could have been rationalised somehow in a way that didn't reduce the rail system to a poor second place to the roads. Maybe by not focusing on the passenger side of the business at the expense of freight, which was, after all, the original priority before Beeching arrived. Dr. Beeching's historically noted connections to the road building and oil industries are, of course, completely irrelevant. Anyway, this isn't about Beeching, this is about the British Rail he spawned. Before he got there, they were known as British Railways and kept their own profile relatively subordinate to the lines themselves. Beeching's, let's go ahead and call them reforms, necessitated a relaunch and a reselling of the company to Britain in the wake of its brutal decimation. Except that decimation only means cutting off a tenth and Beeching had cut off a third, so... Trissimation? Is that a word? Trissimation? If that's not a word, let's make it one. Anyway, 1964, the newly minted British Rail, appropriately enough losing a third of its name, first adopted some modern public transport icons. That omnipresent font, which came to be synonymous with the words "apologises for the inconvenience," and the design classic, the arrow of indecision. Along with the iconic logo, which survives to this day on road signs and the like as a shorthand for rail travel in general, British Rail also introduced sub-brands, of which the first, as well as arguably the best known, was Intercity, the name under which British Rail sold their long-haul passenger service. It started out as the name of a single line between London and Wolverhampton, which was due to be rationalised out of existence by the introduction of a new electrified line through Rugby. Not wanting the name to go to waste, and mindful of how successful it had been as a small-scale branding exercise, the brand was plucked out of the Black Country to go national in 1966 as the umbrella term for all city-to-city rail travel in Britain. A quick way of linking all of Britain's urban centres, and, in the advertising, the people they're from.
Mum and Dad. Your old friend Monica. You remember Monica?
Oh yeah, I remember Monica.
Uncle Fred. All of them so far, yet so near by intercity.
Especially Monica.
Off-peak returns can save up to £4 bob in the pound. Aren't they worth it? Mum and Dad, Monica, Uncle Fred.
Well, Monica is.
Intercity brings something good into their lives. You.
No attempt at appealing to the female gaze, of course, perhaps with an oaky Brill Cream George Best look-alike, because the female gaze hasn't been invented yet. Give it time. Thanks to Beeching's reforms, the main focus of the British railway system was now passengers, rather than freight, which is arguably what it was designed for. This is why there are so many colossal trucks clogging up the roads these days, pumping several times more toxins into the atmosphere than the trains would have, and quite often disrupting entire small rural towns that just happened to be in the middle of the route and weren't designed for these kind of giant roaring smoke-belching monsters. But I digress. The public were British Rail's focus now, for business or for pleasure, and so advertising started to concentrate on how much better train travel was than cars, at least for certain specific purposes, such as transporting Hattie Jakes.
And welcome to the Sevenoaks Grand Prix. Hattie Jakes versus Jackie Stewart, the loser to buy lunch for the winner in London. Jackie has an ordinary 1600cc family saloon. Hattie has an away day return, which in this case has saved her nearly half the standard fare. And with 3 trains into London every hour,
Poor Jackie.
she can time her journey exactly. So, not only is Jackie's a longer, more tiring trip, but on running costs, petrol and oil, the round trip will cost him nearly twice the away day fare. Or, in this particular case, a great deal more.
Oh, think again. Take a train.
This theme was most thoroughly explored in the late 70s and early 80s, when British Rail adopted the powerful, if slightly deluded slogan, "This is the age of the train." Trouble with this campaign, however, was BR's choice of frontman. A certain beloved family entertainer and monstrous sexual predator and deviant who was in the middle of a career which would leave him the most prolific sex offender in British history. I don't even want to use the cunt's name, quite frankly, and it's not as if you don't know who I'm talking about, so unfortunately I'm going to have to largely skip over this campaign, despite its iconic status. I will give a shout out to Peter Orty, the boy soprano who performed the jingle, and also did the original version of Walking in the Air in 1982. Those were some valuable undescended testes. Basically, the vast majority of Age of the Train adverts showed people suffering in cars, usually either driving to meetings or to the seaside, while His Satanic Majesty explained in voiceover and in person how much better it was to go by rail, because of the train. The campaign, and Molesto the Ape's involvement, unceremoniously ended in 1984. At this point, British Rail was undergoing another structural shake-up known as sectorisation. The company shifted from being run on a regional basis, which, as lines came and went and were upgraded, was becoming less efficient, to being divided up and run by sub-brands. British Rail's public image wasn't exactly sparkling in these days, as can be seen in the way that the calculated pomposity of the age of the train was replaced in this new, more image-conscious campaign with something far more self-effacing.
When was the last time you made a long business trip and your train had to stop for breakfast? Stop for you to do some work? Or stop to spend a penny? When did you last see a train with a puncture? Or a train get nicked for speeding? And who's ever heard of a train jam? See your dealer about an intercity 125. Much quicker, we think, than your 1.6, your 2.3, your 2.8.
Intercity. We're getting there.
"We're getting there" has gone down in history as one of the worst slogans anyone ever came up with for anything. It's a likeable pun on what they do, but it's also practically an admission of failure. Which may have been true, but is still by definition not how you want to pitch your advertising. Apart from that, however, some of the adverts themselves, and this was now the age of the Saatchis and directors like Hugh Hudson and Ridley Scott, were genuinely amusing, creative.
Suppose you took a plane and made the legroom bigger, and made the seats wider, so you could spread yourself a bit. Then made the aisles wider, so you could go for a stroll. And put some proper tables in, so you had more space to do some work or have a meal. Then made the windows bigger. The result would look a bit like this. Your 734 to London. Nicer than your 747, we think. Intercity. We're getting there.
Notice how we're now arguing that trains are also better than planes. Luckily, they never had to compete with jetpacks or teleportation. The new frontman was the disembodied voice of the late Hewell Bennett, who gave the slogan an appropriately self-deprecating delivery. Unfortunately, Bennett could do nothing about the slightly simpering, patronising, even complacent nature of the "We're getting there" slogan, because that was inherent.
British Rail. The quickest way to get in and out of town. We're getting there.
"We're getting there" was soon dropped in favour of effectively sectorising the advertising in the same way as the company itself, taking brand recognition of British Rail as read and advertising the sub-brands, such as the Express Mail Service, the rather sinisterly named Red Star, which was advertised with spuriously subtitled clips from 1960s Nouvelle Vague movies for reasons beyond the realms of normal human understanding.
Pourquoi tu mens? Pourquoi tu dis que tu sais pas?
Oh, c'est affreux. J'ai plus vécu dans cette minute-là que dans toute ma vie passée.
Alors t'as tout vu, mais...
Oh, c'est bête, chérie, mais j'en ai encore froid dans les os.
Dis-le-moi. Dis-le-moi franchement.
Jacques, qu'est-ce que t'as?
Red Star to the door, now in 6 languages.
This was around the time that the Channel Tunnel was being prepared, i.e. argued about endlessly. So maybe the trade people just have France on their minds.
t'a pris?
Je sais plus. Je me rendais pas compte de ce que je faisais.
C'est ça ton mal?
Oui. Ta mère t'en a parlé?
Moi aussi je t'aime, Jacques. Je voudrais être ta femme.
Ah, c'est terrible quand même.
Red star to the door, now in 6 languages.
Intercity, meanwhile, turned to up-and-coming future legend Tony Kaye, who would go on to direct some of the most memorable and successful adverts of the late 80s to mid-90s, as well as the film American History X. He turned out probably the most famous Intercity advert ever made. Fortunately, no one gets curb-stomped.
Anytime you choose, kick off your shoes, rest your eyes, or catch up with the news. Our favorite book will be our perfect company. So relax, forget about the blues, you're doing fine. Leave your cares and worries behind. Loosen up your tie, watch the world speed by. Relax.
The contrast with any British Rail or rail-related advert that had come before couldn't be much sharper. No voiceover and no bragging, just Leon Redbone at his laziest. It showed don't tell to the ultimate, relating its message through pure experience. It was popular and successful to the point where it actually became quite controversial. A lot of people stood up to cry bollocks at the advert's message that travel by train was so smooth and relaxing you'd need to order extra coffee to prevent yourself from sinking into a coma of pleasure.
We're busy doing nothing, working the whole day through, trying to find lots of fun. We're busy doing well, isn't it just a crime? Like to be unhappy, but we never
Well, it's true, it was probably over-egging the pudding a bit, but that was Tony Kaye's job as a director of adverts.
Untwist again, like we did last summer. Untwist again, like we did last year. Untwist again, have a little slumber. Untwist again, untwisting time is here. Untwisting time is here.
Sadly, the writing was on the wall for British Rail at this point. That woman's Conservative government was merrily selling England by the pound, and Wales and Scotland as well when they could get round to it. The British Rail was right in their sights. Unfortunately for them, it was a bit too big to just cut up and sell off right away, like they had with the water and electricity boards. So instead, they decided to starve it to death with legislation, letting it fail as a pretext to privatisation down the road. They're doing the same thing with the NHS right now. It's a proven strategy, because it worked on British Rail. Privatisation seemed inevitable from the day Thatcher and company were re-elected to a third term. At the end of the decade, BR commissioned an advert intended as a celebration, which today feels like an elegy, which may have been the intention at the time.
This is the night mail crossing the border, bringing the check and the postal order, letters for the rich, letters for the poor, the shop at the corner and the girl next door, pulling up Beatock a steady climb, the gradient's against her, but she is on time.
Directed by Hugh Hudson, who went from hand-built by robots to terrifying ritualistic B&H adverts to Chariots of Fire, and narrated by Tom Courtenay, after, of course, W.H. Auden. In fact, the first stanza recited here is from Auden's original, but the rest is all new.
Passing the shunter, intent on its toil, moving the coke and the coal and the oil, girders for bridges, plastic for fridges, bricks for the site are required by tonight. Grimy and grey's the engine's reflection, down to the docks for the metal collection. The passenger train is full of commuters bound for the office to work in computers. The teacher, the doctor, the actor in farce, the typist, the banker, the judge in first class, reading the Times with a crossword to do, returning at night on the 6:42.
Whether or not it was intended as a valediction, it certainly functions as one. If privatisation seemed almost inevitable when Hugh Hudson made that, as the 80s became the 90s, the probability steadily narrowed until it finally hit 1 in 1. Between 1994 and 1997, the railways were sold off. First, the infrastructure and maintenance of the physical tracks themselves was given over to a new company called Railtrack. Then the passenger services were sliced into 25 franchises and sold to the highest bidder. Finally, freight was distributed between 5 companies, 4 of whom were subsidiaries of the same cocking thing. Railtrack spent its first couple of years in the public sector before being sold off itself. It lasted barely 6 more years. 6 accident-strewn years, which turned out to be the darkest in the history of the British rail network. As it turns out, swapping customer service as prime motivator for profit in a public service sector where if you get things wrong people can genuinely be killed is an extraordinarily bad idea. One day we'll learn that. Only kidding, of course we won't. We never lost the double arrow logo though. Signifier of rail travel for over half a century, almost half of which is now spent as a symbol without its company. There is a non-zero chance we might get British Rail back in the future though. So feel free to cross your fingers.
Wild train, hurry, bring my baby back again. Got this letter she wrote to me. Says she's coming home in my Missouri. watch and chain. Hurry, bring my baby back up.